So in Unit 3, we'll be talking about United States imperialism. You'll notice that this covers the same exact dates as the last unit, the Progressive Era, and overlaps with the Gilded Age as well. We're going to talk about presidents that you're already familiar with: McKinley, Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson. But this is what the United States is doing in regards to foreign affairs with other nations. So our first section is called The Roots of Imperialism, and the question we'll be answering is how and why did the U.S. take a more active role in world affairs in the late 1800s? So first we start with what is imperialism. That is when a stronger nation extends control over a weaker nation. This control could be political, military, or economic, or a combination of the three. So imperialism is when a nation goes into an already established nation and basically just takes over. So why in the late 1800s did the U.S. begin to go into other nations? It's because the U.S. needed to extend their influence to become more powerful in order to be able to compete with Europe. Obviously, European nations have been colonizing other nations for centuries. That's how the United States came to be, right? We were first a colony of the British Empire. And by the late 1800s, the British Empire was so extensive that there was a saying that the sun never sets on the British Empire, because literally in every time zone across the globe, Great Britain had control of some foreign nation, had a colony somewhere. So literally the sun was always up somewhere in the British Empire. We see over here a map of Africa. By the late 1800s, the continent of Africa had been colonized by European nations. We can see here how they're divided up, with only two countries not being taken over, and that being Ethiopia over here, and I believe this is Liberia. So causes of U.S. imperialism. There are three that we're going to discuss in more detail: economic benefit, military strength, and national superiority. So let's start with economic benefit. One of the motivating factors behind the United States going into other places is because we needed new markets. We needed new places to sell our goods. You'll recall during the Gilded Age, we had ramped up manufacturing. Mechanization of farm tools had made farming way more productive. And the United States was manufacturing and farming more than Americans could consume. So a motivating factor behind imperialism was finding new places to sell our goods, to make money. We're going to talk about this man on the next slide, the next slide, Alfred Thayer Mahan. But this quote: "Whether they will or not, Americans must now begin to look outward. The growing production of the country demands it." We needed to find new places to sell our goods. Second is military strength. There was a thought in the late 1800s that a strong navy equaled a strong nation. And Alfred Thayer Mahan put forth this theory in his book, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, which we see over here, focused on these years. And basically all of the strongest nations in world history had been supported by a strong navy. So he argues in this book that the U.S. needed to build a modern fleet of ships, and also that we needed to establish foreign bases to refuel our ships as they're going around the world trading and selling their goods. So if we need foreign bases, it's going to be a lot easier if we just go ahead and own those foreign bases instead of having to lease land from another country. By 1900, the U.S. has the third largest navy in the world, behind Great Britain, still number one, and Germany. Our third motivating factor behind U.S. imperialism was national superiority. We've talked about social Darwinism already. That was the idea that some people were better than others and therefore deserved their place of superiority in society. Social Darwinism in this context was the belief that certain nations and races were superior to others and therefore destined to rule over them. So, with this idea, all right, even though we may think of going into a country and just kind of overthrowing and taking control to be a negative thing, at least I hope that we see that in a negative light, social Darwinism justified that some nations were just better, and it would be better for the people who live in these other nations if we rule them. A man named Josiah Strong put forth the idea that the white race had a responsibility to civilize and Christianize the rest of the world. And also a man named Rudyard Kipling wrote a poem during this time period called The White Man's Burden, which kind of ties all of this together. The white man's burden was that they needed to Christianize and civilize the rest of the world. So basically puts forth the idea of this is really hard, takes a lot of effort on our part, but it's better for the rest of the world if we take over these kind of third world type countries where the people are not as civilized as us. We see over here an advertisement from this time period to sell soap. The first step towards lightening the white man's burden is through teaching the virtues of cleanliness. So the idea that we see here a man pictured as uncivilized, and the white man is bringing to him civilization and cleanliness. So this is definitely the darkest part of imperialism, this idea that other people who just had different cultures were somehow lesser than us and therefore deserved to have their land taken and for us to impose our beliefs upon them. This is another cartoon showing the white man's burden. We see here Uncle Sam representing the United States and this guy representing Great Britain or England, carrying these uncivilized people over oppression and ignorance and brutality up to civilization. And we can see that these men are sweating. Obviously not an easy job, but something that needs to be done. So let's talk now about America's first steps towards becoming a world power. We're going to throw it all the way back to 1853 for this first section. Commodore Matthew Perry, the man pictured over here, travels to Japan in 1853. Japan, you may know, is an island off the coast of Asia, and because they were an island, they were able to cut themselves off from the rest of the world for a very long amount of time. They didn't trade, they didn't engage with the rest of the world. In fact, they were so cut off from modern civilization that they were mesmerized by the American ships coming to their country. They described them as giant dragons puffing smoke. They had never seen this technology before. Commodore Matthew Perry was able to convince the leader of Japan to open their borders and trade with the United States, something they hadn't done for a very long time with any other nation. He was able to win the emperor's favor with lavish gifts and also some threats. Basically, he was like, look at this technology. Like, if you don't trade with us and give us what we want, then you're going to experience our wrath. Yeah. This is important because now the U.S. has a presence in the Pacific. All the way across the globe, the United States has a stronghold to be able to exert their influence in Asia. Second, we're going to talk about the purchase of Alaska. In 1867, the United States purchased Alaska from Russia. All right. If you've never noticed how close Alaska is to Russia, it's just a tiny bit of water, the Bering Strait, that separates Alaska from Russia. At the time that this purchase was made, it was known as Seward's Folly. Seward was the Secretary of State that was responsible for the purchase. And if you're not familiar with the term folly, it means a mistake. So obviously this was not seen as a good purchase, kind of as a waste of money. People also described it as Seward's icebox because this little line shows the Arctic Circle. So much of Alaska is just frozen tundra. However, Alaska turned out to be rich in natural resources. So the $7 million that we paid for for Alaska came back to us in the end. And lastly, we're going to talk about Hawaii. If you've never looked at a map and noticed how far Hawaii is, it's about halfway between here and Asia, out in the middle of the Pacific. And if you have looked at a map, you've probably wondered before, why the heck is Hawaii a United States state? How did that come to be? Well, you're about to find out. During this time of imperialism, the United States had used Hawaii as a port on its way to Asia for many years. White missionaries from the United States had established churches and schools in Hawaii. There was a large white population that mostly ran sugarcane plantations, which made them very wealthy. And by the age of imperialism, it is the white population in Hawaii that has the most political power. However, during this time, a tariff known as the McKinley Tariff is passed, which causes trouble with sugar growers because before the tariff, they were able to sell their sugar to the United States at a low price. But once the tariff is added, which you remember is a tax on imported goods, now that the sugar is coming from a foreign country, there's going to be an additional tax. So the white population begins thinking, how can we get around this tariff? Well, if Hawaii is not a foreign nation, then the tariff wouldn't apply. So there begins to be some rumblings about how can we acquire Hawaii. In 1891, Queen Liliuokalani is going to take the throne in Hawaii. So at this point, Hawaii is its own independent nation with a monarch. Queen Liliuokalani was a Hawaiian nationalist, so she believed that Native Hawaiians should have the most power in Hawaii, that shouldn't belong to the white settlers. She hated the fact that white settlers had this much power and authority, and she asserted her power on behalf of the Hawaiian natives. I have here that she hated white settlers, and I wouldn't go as far to say that she hated like white people for who they are, but she hated the amount of power they had in her nation. Well, in the 1890s, the U.S. military is going to overthrow Queen Liliuokalani, and then they are going to annex Hawaii. Annex means to bring into the United States, kind of the way that we annexed Texas. It was an independent country and we brought it into the nation. In 1898, Hawaii officially becomes a U.S. territory. A man, Sanford B. Dole, served as president of Hawaii from 1894 to 1900, and then as the first governor after the annexation. So Hawaii will be a U.S. territory from 1898 until statehood in the 1950s. And I have at the bottom of your notes for you to Google the Hawaiian independence movement and see what's going on currently in the state of Hawaii, because Like you have probably questioned before, why does Hawaii belong to the United States? Many Native Hawaiians also feel the same way. So look into that. And that is the end of this section.